Good morning, all. We might need to pull out a couple more chairs. I'll do that in a minute. I know some of you are here because you're usually in Will's class, and Will is down in Tampa this weekend at a big fundraiser for his particular kind of kidney disease. It was scheduled for the weekend that the hurricane hit down there, and so they had to postpone it. Joe, could I have you, while you're standing, would you mind pulling out a couple more chairs for me? Thanks. We had a teacher here, and there she is. She came back in. We are so blessed to have Carol as an elder and a member of the congregation. And in the summertime, she said, I have this desire to teach 3 classes. Do you have room for me? And it's like, anytime you want to teach, I've got room for you, Carol. And so for those of you who've not been here, she's done 3 times. The first class was on time and thinking about time, but particularly to think about it in the run up to what we experienced last night and today, the whole controversy about time zones and daylight savings time. This is my wife's least favorite day of the year. She was moaning already about how dark it's going to be tonight. I tried to remind her we'd have some light in the morning, and that did not cheer her up one iota. Then last week, we heard about different saints of the church, and that was such a gift. One of the things Carol has also done, if you've not noticed, out in the hallway where we had the pictures of Westminster pastors, she's added pictures of the pastors at Moore Memorial Church, the church that was the antecedent to this congregation. And so appreciate her keeping alive the memory of so many saints in the congregation. And today, it's going to be talking about Presbyterians and the founding of the United States as we think about that before going to the polls on Tuesday. Although I would, looking at most of you, I think have already voted like I have. So anyway, Carol, thank you so much for teaching and being with us.
Well, on the first week when I was teaching a couple of weeks ago, I shared with you that when I started teaching, I got up at 4:45 and went to Gallatin so that Ray could get our kids up and out to school. He's around here somewhere. And so I started reading The Divine Hours by Phyllis Tickle. And I made a habit of sticking things in those books, and they've got masking tape on the outside. I've used them since 1995. And just today, oh, yes. Today I found in there a Reader's Digest article that my mother had torn out and given me called Voting is a Civic Sacrament. And so I think that probably bears very well on what's going on. It was by William Buckley Jr. And then I also found in there an election year prayer, which was from the Presbyterian Outlook, which is a magazine of sorts that comes out once about every 2 weeks, I think now. So that is dated 1984. So I had these little gems, and if any of you want to read them, I will email you a copy of them for you to read. But today we're going to talk about a good bit of church history, but also a good bit of American history. Now, this group probably knows American history inside and out. At least you could make a framework of the history of the United States and what these various documents have in them and why they are important and what the difference between them is. But if you went out to most big box stores or any grocery store in the state of Tennessee and asked people what the difference between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution was, they would say, oh, the Declaration of Independence is our laws. And they cannot quite make that separation, that the Declaration of Independence was a document that was signed by very brave people living in the 13 colonies, that the 13 colonies had sent representatives to what they were calling the Continental Congress, which had started to deal with their grievances. But by 1776, they thought their grievances were so heavy that they needed to separate themselves from Great Britain. And so that was where the United States really began, when these 13 colonies all agreed to leave the Union. Now, this map, some of you are going to have a lot of trouble seeing, but this map is one of my favorites. I found it down on the state archives when it was in the old building at the foot of, well, beside the state capitol. If you haven't been to the new archives, you need to go down there. It's a fabulous building. But I love this map, and I've probably used this map more than any map I've ever had, because it shows all of the ethnic groups that came to the United States, what is now the United States, and where they came from. And so, as you see, we've got two big waves here of Scots-Irish, who are the Presbyterians who came in. And as you see, a large group came into Philadelphia because they came as indentured servants. They couldn't pay their passage. And when they worked their passage off, they started going across Pennsylvania until they got to where the Allegheny and Monongahela rivers come together to form the Ohio. And so they then started going down the crest of the Appalachian Mountains there, and they ultimately crossed over into Virginia, and then the Carolinas, and over into Tennessee. And the same is true in this kind of North Carolina, South Carolina border area. There was another group of Scots-Irish who came in that direction and came in. And so that's why you have this haven of Presbyterians in that part of North Carolina where Davidson College is, and there's just a large group of Presbyterians there. And Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, they were happy to have these people. It was the most diverse colony of the 13 colonies, because William Penn's attitude was, come one, come all, we don't care what your religion is, come on and come in. And so here we have the Scots-Irish coming, and this is the beginning of Presbyterianism in the United States. Now, everybody knows something about what happened next. The colonies grew, their populations grew, they had more and more grievances, and finally they did have this war, the Revolutionary War, and they stated all the reasons in the Declaration of Independence as to why they had to leave and be independent. And primarily, it was geographic and financial reasons. There was all of this land here, and Great Britain was trying to control trade. They were trying to control expansion. And so the colonies signed this. If you ever have a chance to go to Philadelphia, it's the most interesting place in the country, really, because you've got all these people, like there's a Ben Franklin, tribute artist. I'm not supposed to say that this Ben Franklin character is an actor, but there are a lot of interesting things about Quakerism. The Presbyterian Historical Society is there, and they have some great staff members now who will really put up exhibits and things of that nature. So take a trip to Philadelphia, because that is really where Presbyterianism was born. And among the people coming from Scotland into the United States was none other than John Witherspoon. Now, I bet Guy knows who, and all the Princeton people know who John Witherspoon was, but he was became president of what was called the College of New Jersey. And he was an ordained Presbyterian minister. And he came in, he taught a lot of people, as well as being the president of this college. And it was heavily indoctrinated with Presbyterianism, which is based on John Calvin. And then John Knox modified it a little bit, and here we go. So there are there's several documents that you can see the Presbyterians' hand in once you start looking for it. And one is right off the bat, the Declaration of Independence. And John Witherspoon attended this meeting. He signed it. He then helped with the writing of the Articles of Confederation. Now, you know that when the Declaration of Independence was signed, we could have been left and nothing happened, but Great Britain was not going to let us go without a fight. And so that is what started the Revolutionary War. And it took a good long while for the Continental Army under George Washington to come together to be able to fight and ultimately convince the British that it was time for them to leave these 13 colonies and let them be 13 independent states. Now, you also know that what kind of government they created during all of this. They had to have something because they had to work together. The first document they created was a true framework for the government they thought they wanted. And it was, fill in the blank, Mr. Bailey. Thank you. Yes, good. Oh, that's right. That's right. So anyway, John Witherspoon was there, and his hand is on the Articles of Confederation. But what all of you learned was they didn't work out too well. And you know, there's always some big issues along the way. And one of the things we expect our government to do is to keep order and to keep business flowing well. And so the articles were not going to be challenged until there were a couple of big crises along the way. And those crises consisted of a fight between the states that touched the Chesapeake Bay, this oyster war, and they were fighting over who had the rights. And was it North Carolina? Was it Virginia? Was it Maryland? And they were fighting over that. Well, that was problem number one. And at that, they had a meeting about this, the Annapolis Convention, and they agreed that the articles were not working. They were not helping with business because the 13 states now that they are called, they had to have independent contracts with every nation in Europe that wanted to trade with them. And of course, the South was a very agricultural area, as was Pennsylvania as well. And so trade was important. So they said the articles have got to be fixed. We can't do business with what we've got now. Well, that was one, but you know, then it takes something bigger than that sometimes, and this is order. And in Western Massachusetts, a Revolutionary War veteran named Daniel Shays, who had been with George Washington. George Washington had given him a sword, and when the legislature of Massachusetts decided to raise the taxes on these farmers, Daniel Shea led a mob into Springfield, and it ended up being called Shea's Rebellion. And so that frightened the other 12 colonies enough that they were going to have problems in the western part of their states as well. And as you know, that was a huge issue. So they decided to have a convention, a meeting, I guess I should call it. The Congress, under the Articles, called a meeting to strengthen the Articles. And so they met in Philadelphia, right where the Declaration of Independence had been signed. And so here these people come together. And so these are the overarching things that they needed to deal with if these 13 colonies were going to solidify themselves into one nation. How can this be done? And there's always been this tension between liberty and order. How do we provide our citizens with the biggest amount of freedom and yet keep order? And so that was a major question that these delegates to this convention, supposedly to fix the Articles, were under. And so how can we create a government that is going to do this? That's the biggest problem there. And then you see lots of different things kind of coming into play. You know, what is the role of a national government? That was something they had to figure out because they hadn't quite figured that out. What does it mean to be an American, to be a citizen of the United States? Are you just a citizen of Virginia, or are you a citizen of the United States? Who grants you your citizenship? And then the third one was, how shall we, as a growing set of states, how shall we deal with the rest of the world? Because we are very wealthy in matters of agricultural products and other things. And so trade was very important to everybody. So here they come to this meeting. How many of you have ever been to this building in Philadelphia? It really is fascinating. The Declaration of Independence was signed in one end, and what became the Constitutional Convention in the other end. And the National Park System runs this whole enterprise. And as I've told you all before, my goal in life is to become a National Park Ranger. I really want to be in one of these historic sites and tell the stories about it. So in order for this to work, the 13 states have to send people. And there is no question, this is an elitist group of men who come. They are the leaders of their states, and they have the identity of their states to deal with, and the needs and desires of their states to function together. How can we work together? And so on the very first day of this meeting, they had to make some really big decisions. Okay, we're here to strengthen the Articles, but they also had to have somebody run the meetings. Now, you're going to have to get the most important, most respected person who lives in these 13 states, who has international fame because he led the army that defeated the British and got the freedom for these 13 states. So they had to elect somebody. Well, that's a no-brainer. There's only one person that can run this meeting that everybody will approve of, and that's George Washington. So George Washington becomes the leader. And then they decide, after looking the Articles over, they can't be fixed. They're unfixable. We need to start over. Now, this was a big, big decision. And so they decided to do that. And then, as you see in this painting, the curtains are closed and they come together in the spring and start their meetings. And, you know, Philadelphia sits on the river and it's pretty muggy there in the summer. So they had to come together. And so they were going to meet in secret. You're not to go out and tell anybody what you are doing. You cannot write a letter to your spouse and say, oh, we just threw out the articles today. You can't, you have to keep total secrecy if this is going to work. So here you have these delegates, and you can go online on your computer or phone and figure out who most of these people are, but you can always identify Ben Franklin there. And next to George Washington, Ben Franklin was the second most popular man in the United States. His witty sayings and his distribution up and down the coast of his Poor Richard's Almanac what made him a well-known character. And so here we have Ben Franklin, which you can easily identify, and you can find things that have charts that tell you who all of these people are. Now, he came in, and he was 80-something years old by then, and he had been in France for a good long while, and he lived in Philadelphia, so he had to be carried into the meetings on one of these litters that had to have 4 men to carry him in. And he slept through most of the meetings, but he was there. His presence was very much noted. Now, the person that will ultimately, of the delegates, become the star of the show is going to be James Madison. James Madison, whom many people nicknamed Little Jimmy because he was very, very short. He was a delegate from Virginia. His father had owned the largest land acreage in the state of Virginia. He was a frail boy. He was educated by a minister. And then, rather than doing what other wealthy families did, which was send their sons to William and Mary in Virginia, his father sent him, and they were not really Presbyterians, but they sent him to the College of New Jersey, where John Witherspoon put his stamp and his philosophy on to James Madison. And so he comes in and he's got his plan already. You're going to have the easiest thing to do because I've already figured it out. Now, this was called the Virginia Plan. And the Virginia Plan was supported by the Virginia delegation. And first order of business with this plan was we've got to have 3 branches of government. We've got to have a separate executive. We have to have the people's influence, the Congress of the United States. It will be a 2-house Congress, but we're going to have that. And it will be based on population. And then the third branch would be the judiciary. They had to have a judiciary that would settle the fights between the various states. And so he has this plan, and he's ready for them to vote and pass it, and let's sign the document and go home. Well, that didn't quite work because the Virginia plan was really supported by the states that had the biggest population. But the states that had small populations, such as North Carolina, Connecticut, Rhode Island, they were going to be left kind of out in the cold. And so that was not acceptable. And so somebody else introduces an alternative plan where each state has equal representation in both houses. Now, the House of Representatives would be the lower house, and the House the upper house would be the Senate. And so that was the New Jersey plan. And this is where the subject of compromise really comes in and becomes important, because these people had to compromise on lots of different things. So finally, they came up with a compromise that had come from the Connecticut delegation, which was called the Connecticut Compromise. And with this compromise, we were going to have the House based on population, and the Senate would have two senators from every state, no matter how large or how small. And so you've got these two houses now, and they have to create certain specifications for what each house will do. Well, first of all, if the people are going to elect their representatives, how are these senators going to be chosen? And with this legislature kind of taking over, who's going to be left out in the cold? The state legislatures. And so they very quickly thought up a way to solve this problem, and that was to let the state legislatures pick the two U.S. senators. And so that gave them something so that they could buy into the support of this Constitution. Because if they were losing all their power, they were not going to support this. And so they are working very carefully on this. And so we've got that, we've gotten through that, but then the next question comes up, okay, how are we going to count these people? 1, 2, 3, 4. No, oh no. Are you going to count women? Well, of course, they are citizens. Now, can they have any power? No, but they are citizens. Well, what about the South? The South has all of these enslaved workers. And so, needless to say, the Southern states wanted all of their enslaved workers counted. Why? Because it would give them more representatives. And so they argued and argued about this, and the compromise that solved this makes no sense in our 2024 rationale. Each enslaved person would be counted as 2/3 of a person. And that was the compromise. You're not going to count them as one. You're not going to not count them. So they came up with 2/3 for to how they would deal with this population. Now, Gary Wills wrote several books about various documents. One of his very finest is Lincoln at Gettysburg, about the Gettysburg Address. But he's written several books, and one in which he's kind of talked about the presidency and how many national elections were won by Southern presidents because of the 3/5 compromise. So it was just one compromise after another. They get to the executive branch, and okay, we're going to have somebody to run the country. Well, again, everybody's first candidate was George Washington. But some people thought we ought to have a 2-person executive. Some thought a 3. And so they debated and debated and debated about this. And they came up with a 1-person executive and this idea of this electoral college. So that has been in the works and been ups and downs of winning and losing elections pretty much ever since. So they worked on this document. They worked and worked. And James Madison is regarded as the father of the Constitution. But John Witherspoon was right here. He was at the Continental Congress that approved the Declaration of Independence. He signed. He was there when the Articles of Confederation were ratified. He was there. He had his hand on all of this. And we're back to these same 3 questions. What's the role of the federal government? What does citizenship mean? How are we going to have a process for citizenship? That's going into the Constitution as well. What they want the national government to do is specified there. And then we will have a way for the executive branch to sign treaties with nations, and the Senate will have to approve all of those treaties. So they get their foreign policies all worked out. Now, it is a hot, hot summer. They're in a building with big windows, but the windows are closed and the heavy drapes are pulled tight. So a lot of the delegates got really tired and they just gave up and went home, but they kind of showed up. So I want you to remember the Constitution is a bundle of compromise, and they knew that they had to compromise because the country was going to fall apart if they didn't. So James Madison, he got a good bit of his Virginia plan in, and it did kind of give them something to work on, but he was Secretary of State, and then he became president as well. And so here we've got James Madison, and it's time to sign this document. Well, now you see Ben Franklin sitting here, and he's, as if there was a camera there, he seems to be looking right at the painter. And you see George Washington, ever in his military physique, standing there. The document is ready to sign. And so everybody signs. There were some people that went home and didn't sign, but it was signed by delegates from all the states. And now they have to take the document home and get it ratified by their state legislatures. So these delegates are all lined up. They're ready to go. The drapes are open. They're signing it and trying to get out of there as quick as they can. And so Ben Franklin is pretty close to the end of signing. And he then says something quite clever. You know, General Washington has been sitting in this Chippendale chair that has a sun on the back of the chair. And throughout these meetings, when he wasn't sleeping, throughout these meetings, he has looked at that sun, and he said, I wondered every day if it was a setting sun or a rising sun. And then in his own witty way, he said, I now see that it is a rising sun. So that was the benediction for this meeting. Okay, everybody's got to go home and get this thing ratified. So in this Constitution, we've got 5 important principles, and I really think all Americans need to kind of think about this. One is the idea of popular sovereignty. Where does the ultimate authority for this government begin? With the people. It is also a republican form of government. What does that mean? That means that the people elect representatives to represent themselves. It is a federal system of government. And that means a federal system means that the states have some power and the federal government has some power. And then if you take these 2 circles, you will have right there in the middle where they join, you will have shared powers. And that's what, for example, the interstate highway are built with shared power with the states and lots of other things. So that federal system of government, and you know, if your grandchildren don't know this, go home and tell them what this means. They need to know. Okay, separation of powers. The Congress and the whole federal government will have 3 branches: the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judiciary. And so the powers are separated, but they all work together to watch and to oversee the other two branches. They have checks and balances. And so each branch has certain authorities, but they check and balance the others. And that there's a good bit of material you all can find, I'm sure, that will show you more examples of that. But here we have the government beginning with the people. How many of you, when you were in what we used to call junior high, you some now are young enough to have been in what was now called middle school, but it begins with we the people, and so we all had to, of a certain age, had to memorize the preamble to the Constitution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. And so this is what really is the heart of what they were trying to get across to the people who were in the states, and how the general welfare of everybody was going to take place. And this Constitution has a very clear process of how amendments can be introduced and how they can be ratified by the states. It also, there's one thing that this Constitution doesn't have that, at least up to this time, the nations of Europe all had, and that was a national language and a national church. Now, the reason they couldn't put those things in there, had somebody wanted to, was we were already so diverse. I mean, we had people speaking all sorts of language, just primarily European languages, but we had all sorts of people speaking different languages, and we had a plethora of different types of religion, of different denominations, and so we could not ever agree on a national language. Some people thought it should be German, and because that was kind of the intellectual language of the day, but that didn't get anywhere. And so there are some people that think that needs to be amended to the Constitution, but that's going to be a hard one to get through, I think. And then the other part of all of this is the religion. And James Madison, you can tell really the people who were at this convention, you can really tell what the religions are more or less by where they live. And I've talked about this book before, but it's really probably my all-time favorite book for American history, Albion Seed. I know some of you have read it, and it has the history of the colonies by the geographic region. So you've got New England, you've got the southern colonies, you've got the middle colonies, and then he has a chapter in here about the Scots-Irish. And so it's really packed with a lot of information about religion, and it's a great read. It goes very fast once you get into it, and it's really tells you a lot about the religions of these people. But for example, in New England, the religion was primarily a Calvinist of some kind, of congregational churches. And then coming on down into the middle colonies, you have the Church of England, because they were founded by people from Jamestown and the Carolinas, by people who were Anglicans, and they came in And so that area was primarily the American version of Anglicans, which is the Episcopal Church. And so we've got all of those Virginia pastors, Virginia presidents being of the Anglican persuasion or the Episcopal Church. And then in the Southern colony, you've got a whole hodgepodge of religions down here, because you saw on that map how many groups came in. And so that was kind of a no-brainer that there was going to be a lot of Presbyterians in the South. And so that was how that all kind of worked out here in history. So here we have the formation of the United States government. I'm sure you saw this in some civics book you had somewhere, government, whatever. You see how the federal government is organized, and look what else is organized pretty close to the same way. The federal government, you've got the federal government, the branches of government, the state governments, you've got the county governments, the city governments, you've got all of those levels of government, and the Presbyterians are organized. Thank you, John Witherspoon, for this, and James Madison, because the Presbyterian Church has the people are the whole, the yeast that holds everything together. And so at the bottom of the pyramid here are the people, and that's us, the congregations of the Presbyterian Church. And so the next level above that is the presbytery. And we've had the presbyteries have changed their geographic boundaries as things have changed. And so they're in the middle. And then the next level up, it's like a series of courts. The next level up is the synod. And the synod is made up of several presbyteries. And then at the top is the Presbyterian General Assembly. And so here you see the session of the church is at the top here, and then the presbytery, the synod, and the General Assembly of the United States. The descriptions, these are so carefully matched up that it's really quite amazing to start thinking about that. And so John Calvin had already sort of set this in motion way back in the 1500s when he, as a French Huguenot, went to Geneva and started his reformed religion, kind of countering Martin Luther's idea of breaking from the Catholic Church. So he put all of this together in a very loose fashion, and then it passed on to John Knox, and then it passed on to John Witherspoon. Now, there's a big controversy. John Witherspoon, many people say he was a descendant of John Knox, but there's no proof. There's no proof of that. And Princeton had a big kerfuffle a few years back. Guy, don't you remember they were fighting over moving John Witherspoon's statue off the campus? And the reason was that he was, among other things, a farmer, and he owned a bunch of enslaved workers. And so as a result of that, the philosophy professors and some of the religious professors wanted that statue taken down. And I don't think that's ever been resolved, has it, Guy? No. I think the statue is still there, but that's right. Woodrow Wilson, one of our presidents, I think we've had 6 Presbyterian presidents, but Woodrow Wilson was the son of a pastor who his father was the pastor of the Atlanta Presbyterian Church, and then he became his father continued preaching, and Woodrow Wilson was educated by Presbyterians all the way up. But he had one thing kind of going against him, and that was that when the Battle of Atlanta took place in the Civil War, near the end of the war, his mother took him and his siblings up in the bell tower of that church so that they could see the city burn and see what those Yankees were doing. And so he came along and he tried to put that behind him, but he really was never able. John? That's right. I wonder where John Bailey went to school, or his children or grandchildren. I, ah, amazing how many people know that, John. So anyway, yes, he did spend a year at Davidson, and he was a troubled president, but he was filled with certitude. It was my way or the highway. And so when World War I ended, the Great War, and rather than sending delegations from the State Department over there to help negotiate the treaty to call the war over, Woodrow Wilson himself goes. And he really made a lot of the other countries' people mad, because he was so sure that everything he was saying was going to be adopted and was the right thing. And he had written this document, the 14 points, and this is what you're going to do, and this is what you're going to do. And the others did not like getting told by the United States, who never had much action. The only action we had was a little bit before we entered the war, when we had a little fight with Mexico. And so, but it was very short-lived, and they came into New Mexico, and a few shots were fired. But that's the extent of war damage we had in that war. Whereas, look at France and Great Britain, and France especially, had lost so many men. Go watch that movie, All Quiet on the Western Front. And Germany had lost a whole lot of young men. And so the British and the French were demanding that Germany pay them back for the war, because that was expense. They wanted money for it. Well, Woodrow Wilson really didn't think that needed to happen, but that did not suit the British and the French. And so they came up with these fees that were going to be paid by Germany to them. But Germany, hey, they don't have any money. So where are they going to borrow the money? The United States. And so here's the United States loaning Germany money to pay the British and the French. And then they've got money invested here in the United States. So you can kind of see the dynamics for the Depression being created right here. But Presbyterians have a strong role in the founding of our country. And I hope that you will begin to keep your eyes on all of these things as you go forward this week in the election and the results. Thank you very much. Any questions? Is it time for church? Yes. Pardon me? Yes, he was. He was. And you know, James K. Polk was a Presbyterian, but when he married Sarah Childress, who was a Methodist, he was forced to join the Methodist Church. So he flip-flopped. But all of these were Presbyterians. So let us end here today